If you love dark stories that crawl under your skin and refuse to let go, make sure you're subscribed, hit like, and tell me in the comments what you think really happened. Because this case only gets darker from here. The rain came down hard that night, turning the interstate into a ribbon of black glass. Red and blue lights smeared across the wet asphalt as police cruisers screamed past stalled traffic, engines howling, sirens cutting through the storm like alarms in a nightmare. At the center of it all was a gray sedan, weaving violently between lanes, its rear bumper already dented, its taillight shattered. Inside, a man gripped the steering wheel, so tightly his knuckles had gone white. His name was Ethan Cross, and he was running. Dispatch radios crackled with half-finished sentences. Suspect refusing to stop. Speeds exceeding 90. Possible involvement in a homicide. Helicopter blades thundered overhead, briefly illuminating the car as it swerved off the highway and disappeared down a narrow service road that led into a stretch of industrial wasteland. Abandoned warehouses. Rusted chain-link fences. No cameras. No witnesses. Or so Ethan thought. The sedan fishtailed, clipped a concrete barrier, and spun to a stop in a cloud of steam and smoke. By the time officers surrounded the vehicle with guns drawn, the driver's door was open. The car was empty. Less than an hour later, 15 miles away, a body was found. It lay at the edge of a drainage canal behind a shuttered textile factory, partially hidden by tall weeds and discarded pallets. The victim was a woman in her early 30s, carefully dressed, her shoes still spotless despite the mud around her. No wallet, no phone, no obvious signs of a struggle. Just a single detail that made every officer at the scene go quiet. The time of death was estimated at least 12 hours earlier, which meant the man running from police couldn't have just committed the murder. Or could he? Detective Laura Mitchell arrived as dawn began to break, the sky turning a dull, lifeless gray. She had worked homicide for 12 years, long enough to know that the quiet scenes were always the worst. No screaming witnesses. No chaos. Just questions waiting patiently to be answered. The victim was identified by mid-morning. Hannah Blake, financial analyst. No criminal record. No known enemies. Lived alone in a renovated loft downtown. Reported missing the previous afternoon by her sister after failing to show up for a family dinner. Mitchell stood over the crime scene, hands tucked into her coat pockets, eyes scanning every inch of the canal bank. Something about it felt staged. Too clean. Too deliberate. Hannah hadn't been dumped here in a panic. She'd been placed. By noon, the name Ethan Cross was officially connected to the case. Ethan was 38, a freelance IT consultant with a spotless public record and a reputation for being quiet, reliable, forgettable. He and Hannah had dated briefly the year before, a fact uncovered when detectives pulled phone records and found a cluster of late-night calls that abruptly stopped 6 months ago. Friends described their breakup as amicable. No drama. No fights. No reason to dig deeper. Except Ethan had vanished. His apartment was empty, his laptop gone, his bank accounts untouched. Neighbors reported hearing nothing unusual. No shouting. No visitors. Just a man who seemed to have packed up his life and stepped off the map, until that high-speed chase brought him screaming back into focus. Detective Mitchell didn't believe in coincidences, especially not ones that ran at 90 miles an hour. As the investigation unfolded, details began to surface that didn't fit the image Ethan had built so carefully. Financial records showed Hannah had recently moved a significant sum of money into a private investment account, one Ethan had set up for her months earlier. The account had been emptied 2 days before she disappeared. The transfer was clean, authorized, and devastatingly legal. When confronted with the evidence, Hannah's sister broke down. She had no idea about the money. No idea Hannah was planning to confront someone about it. But she remembered one thing clearly. The last person Hannah said she was meeting, Ethan. Search teams expanded their efforts, combing the industrial district where Ethan's car had been abandoned. Inside the sedan, forensic techs found traces of dried mud and a single blonde hair clinging to the passenger side seatbelt. Hannah was blonde. It wasn't proof. But it was enough to turn pressure into urgency. A manhunt was launched. For 48 hours, Ethan Cross became a ghost. Sightings poured in from across the state, gas stations, motels, roadside diners. But each lead evaporated as quickly as it appeared. His face filled news broadcasts. His name repeated with a growing sense of inevitability. The public had already decided what the evidence hadn't yet proven. He was guilty. Then, late on the third night, Detective Mitchell received a call that made her blood run cold. A storage unit on the outskirts of the city had been broken into. The lock was cut cleanly, professionally. Inside, among stacks of old furniture and sealed boxes, officers found something that didn't belong. A burner phone. The phone was still powered on, still active. And when technicians accessed the call log, one number appeared again and again, dialed repeatedly in the hours after Hannah was believed to have died. It belonged to a private investigator, not hired by the police, but by Hannah Blake. As Mitchell stared at the evidence laid out on the metal table, the phone, the financial statements, the timeline that no longer made sense, one unsettling thought began to take shape. If Hannah knew she was in danger, and if Ethan really thought he'd gotten away with it, why had she been investigating him in the first place? And what had she discovered before someone made sure she never had the chance to tell anyone? The answers, Mitchell knew, were waiting somewhere in the city's forgotten corners. And, whatever they were, someone was willing to kill to keep them buried. By the time the sun rose over the city again, Detective Laura Mitchell hadn't slept. The burner phone sat sealed in an evidence bag on her desk, its cracked screen reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights. Hannah Blake hadn't just been afraid. She'd been preparing. The private investigator's name was Daniel Rourke. Mid-40s. Former state police. Clean reputation, low profile. When Mitchell reached him, his voice tightened the moment she mentioned Hannah. She was scared, Rourke said quietly. Not paranoid. Calculated. She believed someone close to her had been lying for a long time. Rourke met detectives at headquarters within the hour. He brought a thin folder, its corners worn, the kind of file someone carried everywhere because they couldn't afford to lose it. Inside were photos, timestamps, and a handwritten note from Hannah dated 3 weeks before her death. If anything happens to me, it's not an accident. Hannah had hired Rourke to look into Ethan's past after discovering inconsistencies in his stories. Not crimes. Not yet. Just gaps. Years that didn't line up. Jobs that couldn't be verified. References that didn't exist. When Rourke dug deeper, the gaps widened. Ethan Cross wasn't his real name. His fingerprints didn't match any criminal database, but facial recognition flagged him twice. Once in Ohio, once in Nevada, under 2 different identities. Both men had vanished years earlier, leaving behind unpaid debts, abandoned apartments, and a trail of quiet financial manipulation. He doesn't steal loud, Rourke said. He embeds himself, gains trust, then drains people slowly enough they don't realize what's happening until it's too late. Hannah had realized, and she'd confronted him. Phone records showed a call between Hannah and Ethan the afternoon she disappeared, lasting just under 4 minutes. No raised voices captured. No threats. Just silence at the end, the line going dead. Mitchell felt the case tightening, the way a knot does when pulled from both ends. Ethan hadn't panicked after killing Hannah. He'd planned, cleaned, waited. And when he finally ran, it wasn't because of guilt. It was because something unexpected had surfaced. That something became clear 12 hours later. A patrol officer responding to a welfare check found Daniel Rourke's office door ajar. Inside, filing cabinets were overturned, papers scattered like leaves after a storm. Rourke himself was slumped behind his desk, alive but unconscious, blood trickling from a gash above his temple. Nothing valuable was taken. Computers were smashed. One file was missing, Hannah Blake's. Rourke survived, but the message was unmistakable. Ethan Cross was no longer just running. He was erasing. The department elevated the threat level immediately. Anyone connected to the case was put under protective watch, including Hannah's sister. Mitchell hated how late it felt. Ethan had been 3 steps ahead from the beginning. Then came the footage. Traffic cameras near the industrial district captured a man matching Ethan's build entering a hardware store 2 nights before the body was found. He paid cash. Baseball cap pulled low. Purchased rope, gloves, plastic sheeting. The timestamp aligned perfectly with Hannah's last known movements. Still, something didn't sit right. Mitchell replayed the chase footage again and again. Ethan's driving hadn't looked desperate. It looked controlled. He'd abandoned the car not because he crashed, but because he wanted to disappear on foot. And yet he left behind trace evidence: mud, hair, even partial fingerprints. Sloppy for a man who'd lived under false identities for years. Unless he wanted to be seen. The next break came from an unexpected place. A junior analyst in financial crimes flagged a shell company connected to Ethan's stolen identities. The company had been quietly funneling money offshore for over a decade. Not just Hannah's money. Dozens of small transfers from different people across different states. Victims who never reported anything because nothing had appeared stolen outright. Until Hannah. 3 hours after the analyst's discovery, a wire transfer attempt triggered an automatic freeze. Someone was trying to move the remaining funds, millions, out of the country. The request originated from a motel computer. Detectives moved fast. The motel sat on the edge of a desolate highway, the kind of place truckers stopped when they didn't want to be remembered. Room 17 was registered under a fake name, paid for in cash. When officers breached the door, they found it empty, but warm. Coffee half drunk. Shower still damp. On the bed lay a neatly folded map with a route circled in red. And beside it, a photograph. Hannah Blake. The photo was recent. Taken after she'd gone missing. She was alive in it. Eyes wide, fear unmistakable. A timestamp glowed faintly in the corner. Hours after her supposed time of death. Mitchell felt her pulse hammering in her ears. The coroner's estimate had been wrong. Hannah hadn't died when they thought she had, which meant she'd been alive while Ethan was being chased. Alive while he was running. Alive long enough to be moved. The implications were horrifying. Either the body wasn't Hannah's, or someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to confuse the timeline. DNA testing was rushed. The results came back just after midnight. The body in the canal was Hannah Blake. But the time of death had been altered. Someone had refrigerated the remains. Someone with planning, resources, and patience. Someone who needed the police to believe the crime was already over. Mitchell stood alone in the evidence room, staring at the photo from the motel bed. Hannah's eyes seemed to follow her, frozen in a moment of terror the world never saw. Ethan Cross hadn't just killed to escape. He'd killed to buy time. And now, with his money frozen, his cover collapsing, and every exit closing in, there was only one move left. He was going to silence the last loose end. And Detective Mitchell had a sinking feeling she knew exactly who that was. Search teams moved fast, descending into the darkness, with flashlights slicing through the fog. At the bottom, they found a makeshift campsite. Burned documents, fake IDs, a laptop smashed beyond repair, and a single hard drive partially melted but intact. Ethan Cross had been dismantling his life piece by piece. Then they heard footsteps. He didn't run when they found him. He stood at the edge of the ravine, hands raised, face illuminated by a dozen beams of light. Calm, almost relieved. "You're too late," he said. "It's already done." Mitchell stepped forward. "It's over, Ethan." He smiled faintly. That's what she said too. They took him into custody without resistance. No dramatic confession. No final outburst. Just silence. The hard drive changed everything. Forensic analysts worked nonstop, reconstructing files Ethan believed were destroyed. What they uncovered was staggering. Detailed records of every identity he'd assumed. Every financial transfer. Every victim whose life he'd quietly dismantled. And then, buried deep in the folders, a video file. Timestamped the night Hannah disappeared. The footage showed Hannah seated in a chair, bruised but alive, staring directly into the camera. Ethan's voice could be heard off-screen, calm and methodical. She figured it out, he said. So I gave her a choice. Walk away and disappear, or expose me and die as herself. Hannah's voice was steady despite the fear in her eyes. You don't get to decide who lives as who, she said. You don't get to erase people. The video cut out before the end. Ethan never explained what happened next. He didn't have to. The evidence spoke loudly enough. The trial was swift. The media frenzy relentless. Ethan Cross was convicted on multiple counts: murder, kidnapping, fraud, identity theft, sentenced to life without parole. The public exhaled, satisfied that justice had been served. But Detective Mitchell couldn't shake the unease. 3 months later, it returned. A body was found in a river 2 counties away. Male, early 40s. No ID, no phone, no immediate cause of death. But the coroner noted something strange. The time of death didn't match the condition of the body. Refrigeration. Mitchell stared at the report, a familiar chill crawling up her spine. On the man's wrist was a faint scar, identical to one listed in Ethan's old files. A man whose identity had supposedly been stolen years earlier. Which meant one thing: Ethan hadn't worked alone. Someone else knew the system, the methods, the signatures. Someone was still out there, finishing what he started. And as Mitchell closed the file, one thought echoed louder than the rest. They thought he got away with it. They were wrong. And if you think this story was intense, the next one is even darker. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what comes next. The safe house was too quiet. Detective Laura Mitchell noticed at the moment she stepped inside, the kind of silence that pressed against the ears, thick and unnatural. 2 officers were stationed outside, another at the end of the hallway. Hannah Blake's sister, Emily, sat on the edge of the couch, hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched. Her eyes were red, exhausted from days of fear that refused to loosen its grip. Mitchell tried to sound reassuring, but her instincts were screaming. Ethan Cross had always been ahead of them. If he was running out of options, he wouldn't lash out blindly. He would strike precisely. And Emily was the last person who could expose what Hannah had uncovered. The call came just after midnight. A hit on facial recognition at a regional bus terminal 3 states away. Grainy footage showed a man with his hood up, moving calmly through the crowd. He looked thinner, sharper. But it was him, Ethan Cross. No rush, no panic, just a man executing his final plan. Mitchell knew then that the bus terminal wasn't the destination. It was a distraction. She sprinted back into the safe house and froze. The back door was open. One officer lay unconscious near the kitchen, blood pooling beneath his head. The other was gone. Emily was gone. The mug lay shattered on the floor, coffee seeping into the carpet like a spreading stain. Ethan hadn't been fleeing. He'd been hunting. The city exploded into motion. Roadblocks. Alerts. Every unit available. Mitchell felt the weight of it settle into her chest as the pieces finally aligned. Hannah had learned about the shell company, about the stolen identities, about the millions Ethan had siphoned away over the years. And she'd figured out the final layer. Ethan didn't just steal from people. He replaced them. Every identity he used belonged to someone who had vanished quietly, their lives hollowed out and left to rot while he stepped into the gaps. Hannah had found the pattern, and once she did, she was never meant to survive it. Emily was leverage, and Ethan needed leverage because the money was gone. The walls were closing in. Cell phone pings led police to an abandoned rest stop near the state line, shuttered years earlier after a fatal accident. Floodlights cut through the darkness as officers moved in, weapons drawn. Inside the restroom building, they found signs of a struggle. Scratches on the tile, a broken zipper, a smear of blood, but no bodies. Mitchell stepped outside, her breath visible in the cold night air, and spotted something beyond the tree-line. A single light, flickering. A car. They found it parked near the edge of a ravine, engine running. Emily was inside, hands bound, shaking but alive. She sobbed when she saw Mitchell, words tumbling over each other, desperate and incoherent. He said Hannah tried to ruin him, she cried. He said she didn't understand what she was part of. Mitchell cut the restraints herself. Where is he? Emily hesitated, then pointed toward the ravine. He went down there. He said I should watch.